Hi, interesting story recap here. Today I'm going to explain an American science fiction film called Gulliver's Travels. Spoiler alert. So, watch out. Lemuel Gulliver, a man in his middle age, awakens in his disorganized apartment located in New York City, and proceeds to carry out his morning routine. He engages in a conversation with the superhero figurines he has on his shelf, and also displays his playful side by dancing in the shower. Gulliver is employed in the mailroom of a newspaper company in New York City. On that particular day, Gulliver meets a new colleague named Dan and becomes friends with him. While carrying out their mail delivery duties, the two chance upon Gulliver's long-standing crush and a journalist by the name of Darcy Silverman. Later on that day, Dan receives notice of his promotion to the position of head of the mailing department on his first day of work. Gulliver has been employed in the organization for a decade, but his colleagues do not hold him in high regard. Feeling upset, Gulliver exits the office and observes Darcy still working at a late hour. He musters the courage and approaches her cabin to ask her out on a date. However, due to his nerves getting the best of him, he picks up an arbitrary document from her desk and leaves instead of asking her out. Darcy inquires if Gulliver is interested in applying for a travel writing assignment. Feeling nervous, Gulliver agrees and is required to submit a travel blog the next day. At home, Gulliver plagiarizes several articles from the internet to use in his blog. The next day at work, he gives it to Darcy, who is impressed by his writing abilities and assigns him a new task. Darcy requests him to travel to the Bermuda Triangle to write an article about the legends of ships disappearing there in mysterious circumstances. In order to make a good impression on her, Gulliver agrees to the task. The next day, Gulliver flies to Bermuda, where he is met by a man who picked him up. The man takes Gulliver to a boat that has been rented, and demonstrates how to operate it. Gulliver sets sail alone into the Bermuda Triangle in the boat. For the initial few hours, he amused himself by reading magazines on how to build a robot and consuming multiple cans of Coke. Soon after, he falls asleep. At some point, he awakens to find a massive wave ahead of him. A severe sea storm hits, and he quickly dons a life jacket. The boat is being tossed around violently in the water. Gulliver turns around to see an enormous sea tornado approaching his boat. Gulliver and his boat get caught up in the tornado, and are pulled into its eye. The screen goes dark. When Gulliver regains consciousness, he finds himself unable to move his body. He looks down and is shocked to see a small man standing on his chest. Their leader presents himself as Commander Edwardian of Lilliput. A confused Gulliver screams in fear and breaks free from the ropes with ease. Assuming it to be a dream, Gulliver tries to close his eyes. Edward commands his soldiers to subdue the creature. The soldiers attach their hooks to Gulliver's pants and succeed in rendering him unconscious. Upon regaining consciousness, Gulliver finds himself tied to a cart and being transported into the kingdom of Lilliput. The tiny residents come out of their homes to see the creature. Gulliver is brought to the royal palace and introduced to King Theodore, the ruler of Lilliput. The king's daughter, Princess Mary, feels sympathy for Gulliver and asks Edward if the restraints are needed. Edward asserts that Gulliver is a spy from their enemy kingdom, Lilliput. Gulliver finally speaks and inquires the king about his whereabouts. King Theodore's secretary, Jinx, informs him that he is in Lilliput, the most powerful nation on Earth. In the next scene, Gulliver is shown to be imprisoned in a cave. He encounters another prisoner named Horatio, who was given a life sentence by Edward for attempting to court Princess Mary. Edward approaches them again and listens to them, referring to Gulliver as a lame ass. When an angry Edward threatens to imprison them for life, Gulliver explains that lame ass refers to someone who is courageous. Satisfied with the explanation, Edward takes both prisoners to a field and makes them plow it using Gulliver's strength. Edward restrains Gulliver with a machine. At that moment, the sound of 2 bell rings is heard from the palace, signaling an attack from Lilliput. They are attempting to kidnap Princess Mary and have set fire to the palace. Edward rushes to the palace and orders everyone not to rescue the princess as he wants to be the one to save her. But Horatio urges Gulliver to do it as Edward won't be able to reach her in time. Gulliver easily overpowers the Lilliputian soldiers and rescues the princess. But the king and his secretary are trapped in the fire. In a rush, Gulliver uses his urine to extinguish the flames on the building. Everyone applauds him when he successfully stops the fire and saves King Theodore. King Theodore releases him and Horatio from imprisonment and expresses his gratitude to Gulliver for his bravery. He also invites everyone to a feast in the evening to celebrate the event. During the feast, the king asks Gulliver where he is from, and he replies that he is from Manhattan. The people of Lilliput assume that Gulliver is the president of Manhattan as he is the most brave man from there. Gulliver feels like a hero for the first time in his life, so he invents a story, claiming he was known as President the Awesome. Everyone accepts his story, except for Edward. The following day, The people of Lilliput construct a grand home for Gulliver with all the amenities he never had access to in New York. At Gulliver's request, the king sends a search party to locate his washed-up boat. Gulliver also has them construct a theater that can accommodate all the citizens of the kingdom. He then performs a play about the sinking of the Titanic, claiming it to be the story of his life. The audience is captivated by the tragic story of his life. Edward asks how Gulliver was saved after drowning, and Gulliver claims that he was brought back to life. Later, Horatio requests Gulliver's help to impress Princess Mary, and Gulliver agrees. They go to the palace, and Horatio speaks to the princess. A concealed Gulliver recites the lyrics of the song Kiss, prompting Horatio to repeat them. As a result, the princess starts to develop feelings for Horatio. However, she is summoned by Edward, who has come to court her as they have been arranged to be married since he is considered the bravest man in the kingdom. Princess Mary is not interested in Edward, but she feels unable to reject him. Meanwhile, the search party discovers Gulliver's washed-up boat along with cans of Coke. When Gulliver arrives at the site, he finds that his phone is still functional and discovers that he has 12 voicemail messages from Darcy. It turns out she is angry to have found out about Gulliver's plagiarized article. She has to now sail on the same route Gulliver came through to conduct research on the Bermuda Triangle herself. Gulliver now does not want to return to New York and confront her, so he decides to stay in Lilliput permanently. Edward is unhappy with this decision and expresses to the king his suspicions about Gulliver. The king disregards his concerns and states that he trusts Gulliver. Due to his decision to stay, the king grants Gulliver the title of the new general and demotes Edward to vice-general. Jealous Edward turns off Lilliput's defense system, making it easier for their enemy Blefuscia to attack. Seeing this, Blefuscian soldiers and their king quickly plan to launch an attack on Lilliput. The Blefuscian army approaches the kingdom through the water and fires cannonballs towards Lilliput. As the newly appointed general, it is now Gulliver's responsibility to defend the kingdom and prevent the attack. He nervously steps into the water and begins to splash it around. The cannonballs have no effect on Gulliver, as he is much larger in comparison. Eventually, Gulliver becomes the hero of Lilliput by defeating their enemies, the Blefuscians. The Lilliputians fulfill all of Gulliver's desires, including building a replica of Times Square to make him feel at home. They also start to emulate Gulliver's appearance, with soldiers appointed to cut his hair and give him massages. However, Edward becomes resentful of Gulliver's newfound status and breaks into the prince's chamber one night. He says that he has the right to enter at any moment because he is courting the princess. The princess eventually admits that she does not love him and does not wish for him to court her. Edward, enraged, sets off towards Blefuscia. Request assistance from the king. Edward's troops have discovered the Create Your Own Robot book. The king of Blefuscia consents to assist him in constructing a robot battling Gulliver with the help of the book. After a few days, Gulliver visits the model. Gulliver is getting ready to fight little people when a massive robot suddenly appears, surprising him. Edward is standing in front of him, operating. He is challenged to a duel by Edward. Gulliver possesses no choice but to accept. The robot is too heavy for him to push, thus powerful than him. Gulliver is lifted by it using his trousers, which creates he conceded defeat. Additionally, Gulliver admits that all he asserted that he was the president is untrue. The betrayal by him surprises both the king and the princess. As a punishment, Edward sends Gulliver to the island where we dare not go, a place that is off limits. Gulliver gets picked up after being placed there as punishment. It turns out that the island is inhabited by giants, as evidenced by a huge little girl. The girl keeps Gulliver in her Barbie home and dresses him in clothes since she views him as a toy. Feminine pink clothing. Darcy's body was in Lilliput at the time. Arrives at the beach. Everyone was informed by Gulliver that Darcy as Edward sees her as his princess and locks her up in a jail where King Theodore and his queen have been imprisoned following Gulliver's defeat. When Horatio notices this, he chooses to visit to retrieve Gulliver. The island where we dare not go was needed. Even though he is little on the island, he makes it to Gulliver without incident. A dead American skeleton is also present in the young girl's dollhouse. Air Force pilot Gulliver escapes and flies back to Lilliput using a parachute. He first approaches Darcy in the prison and admits to having feelings for her. She seemed to be warming up to him and forgiving him for using the piece that she had written. Edward has accepted Gulliver's invitation to a duel. He no longer desires to display his bravery, but really wants Lilliput to succeed. The two are in front of one another the following day. Others prepared for combat. Gulliver requests that Edward return the throne to King Theodore if he triumphs, but if he loses, Edward will completely demolish the country. The two engage in combat, and Edward quickly defeats him. Running to aid him, Horatio succeeds in entering the robot. He finally depowers the robot after defeating Edward from within. Gulliver then defeats it without difficulty, and the crowd screams in applause. Darcy enjoys the victory. Horatio is rewarded for his bravery by receiving a permit to approach Princess Mary. They ultimately share a kiss. However, right then, Edward, who has gone insane, grabs the princess prisoner, but she defeats the traitor after becoming tired of Edward up in annoyance. Then Darcy gives Gulliver his first kiss. Theodore and the Blefuscan king are going to restart the conflict, but Gulliver prevents them. By reciting Edwin, he effectively aids in bringing the competing island countries together. Finally, after Star's War, he and Darcy make their way back to New York City. Cut to a few weeks later, Gulliver has returned to work fulfilling his connection with Darcy, and the film concludes as the two in workplace while embracing each other. Finally, the film comes to an end here. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on post notifications and show your support by giving it a like. Your support helps the channel grow and allows us to continue creating similar content. Thank you for tuning in.